The church is the place where the spirit of wisdom is widely poured out. Welcome back to Why Hope, the video series that explores reasons for hope in our day. We are in season 7, where we are exploring reasons that the existence of the church can provide hope. And this is episode 4 in that season, the place where the Spirit speaks in wisdom through all. Well, I'm going to begin somewhere rather a long way from the church, actually. I'm going to begin in the book of Proverbs, in book of Proverbs chapter 8. And in the book of Proverbs, as you may know, wisdom is personified. She's represented as a woman. Here's just a few verses about that. Does not wisdom call out? Does not understanding raise her voice? At the highest point along the way, where the paths meet, she takes her stand. Beside the gate leading into the city, at the entrance, she cries aloud, "To you, O people, I call out, I raise my voice to all mankind. You who are simple, gain prudence. You who are foolish, set your hearts on it. Listen, for I have trustworthy things to say. I open my lips to speak what is right. My mouth speaks what is true, for my lips detest wickedness. All the words of my mouth are just. None of them is crooked or perverse. To the discerning, all of them are right. They are upright to those who have found knowledge. Choose my instruction instead of silver, knowledge rather than choice gold. For wisdom is more precious than rubies, and nothing you desire can compare with her." Well, in this passage and wider in Proverbs, we find what one commentator has described as the moods of wisdom, the different ways in which she speaks. And you might like to have a look back over that passage and see which of these you think you identify. But I think I find entreaty, rebuke, preaching, declaration, instruction, warning, guiding. The preaching one might seem a little bit controversial, but if you look at the Greek translation of the Old Testament, so the Septuagint is what is the name for it, it's the ancient translation out of the Hebrew into the Greek, then the word that is being used for what wisdom is doing here when she is crying out is the word that is used in the New Testament for preaching. So even that, I think, is included within this kind of cluster of ways of speaking. So these are, if you like, wise ways of speaking. They are wisdom words. And if you look then at the Gospels and you look at the teaching and the speaking of Jesus, I think we will find each one of these. Let me run through this list again. It may not be a complete list, but it's reasonably comprehensive. Entreaty. Can you think of times when Jesus does that? Rebuke, preaching, declaration, instruction, warning, and providing guidance. So these are the moods of wisdom's words in the Old Testament, and this is something that Jesus then fulfills in the Gospels. But in the church, this role is distributed to everyone. Now, we first glimpse this well before the New Testament begins in the book of Joel. And in the prophet Joel, in the second chapter of his book, he says this, very well-known words. "And afterward I will pour out my spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy, your old men will dream dreams, your young men will see visions. Even on my servants, both men and women, I will pour out my spirit in those days. I will show wonders in the heavens and on the earth, blood and fire and billows of smoke. The sun will be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord, and everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved." The emphasis there, especially in the first part of the little bit that I read, is on the Spirit being poured out upon everyone. And there are 3 particular dichotomies, if you like, that Joel picks up on. He speaks about the old and the young. Your old men will dream dreams, and your young men will see visions. He speaks about men and women. "Even on my servants, both men and women, I will pour out my spirit in those days." And there's even a rich-poor dichotomy, because the language of servants brings in a kind of contrast between those who are free and have power and agency, and those who apparently don't. So this is the great vision that Joel has, and you may well know that the Apostle Peter on the day of Pentecost absolutely sees what is happening that day as the Spirit is poured out as being a fulfillment of that promise of Joel. So we see this pattern then emerging in the early church. We get a very good glimpse of it in Paul's first letter to the church in Corinth. Let me read some of this to you. What then shall we say, brothers and sisters? When you come together, each of you has a hymn or a word of instruction, a revelation, a tongue, or an interpretation. Everything must be done so that the church may be built up. If anyone speaks in a tongue, 2 or at the most 3 should speak, one at a time, and someone must interpret. If there is no interpreter, the speaker should keep quiet in the church and speak to himself and to God. 2 or 3 prophets should speak, and the others should weigh carefully what is said. And if a revelation comes to someone who is sitting down, the first speaker should stop. For you can all prophesy in turn, so that everyone may be instructed and encouraged. So there's a wonderful glimpse here of this kind of what we might call almost the democratization of the Spirit, which Joel foretells and which Peter declares has happened at Pentecost. We see that in action here. We see that everybody comes with something to share, something to contribute. They're learning from one another. We see that the people's words are being weighed. That there isn't a kind of, it's not a free-for-all where anyone can say anything, but that the community together are evaluating the quality, the authenticity of the words that are brought. Now, this can be done in different ways today. It doesn't always look quite as multi-voiced as this in a church service, although it might be something we might want to think about, finding ways of increasing the number of voices in church services. But there are ways in which, in home groups, in the week, in conversations, in all sorts of ways, in writing and sharing together in community life, there are ways in which everyone in the church should be able to bring what they believe God is saying, and the community together should hear that, weigh it, and be prepared to submit to it. So here we see these moods of wisdom's words in action in the early church. Now, I do want to acknowledge the fact that Paul's very next words, as he reads on, actually I stopped reading at verse 31, but in verse 34 he says women should be silent in the church, and I don't want to be disingenuous and fail to comment on that. I'm not going to talk about that in detail. I've done that on other occasions, and I'm very happy to enter into correspondence with anybody who's concerned about this. What I would say is that in chapter 11 of this same letter, Paul gives instructions for what a woman should wear when she prays or prophesies. So whatever he is saying, when he goes on to say women should be silent, he's not saying women should just zip it and not contribute to the church. And we see this very clearly in elsewhere in Paul's letters and in the book of Acts. We see women contributing. Women's voices are part of this great democratization of the work of the Spirit. So here is another great reason to have hope, because the church is a place where the Spirit speaks through all.